Welcome to Lessons from Climate Leaders, a David versus Goliath panel. This session is part of the 4th Annual Rising Economy Conference, an immersive virtual and in-person event hosted by the South Island Prosperity Partnership. My name is Sydney Coles. I'm the local journalism reporter for Capital Daily. Once again, a proud sponsor of this event. We're really grateful to have the opportunity to partner with a local initiative like this one so that we can spotlight things that are going on in our region. I'm going to describe a little bit about the format for today. So before I turn you over to the speakers, let me just explain how things are going to get on for the remainder of the panel. About halfway through the conversation, we'll be taking your questions for our speakers. You can submit questions anytime through the Zoom Q&A, which is just below the video. The session's being recorded, and you can submit your questions anonymously if you'd prefer. To interact with attendees, you can use the Zoom or Whova chat. And the production team will monitor the Whova chat and Q&A for those joining us through the app. Finally, if you're posting your takeaways to social media, please use the hashtag RisingEconomy2024. Our moderator today is Peter Cowan, President and CEO of Innovate BC, with over 20 years of experience across Canada's innovation and intellectual property landscape. Peter has led startups, in multinationals and venture capital corporations, along with nonprofits and innovation-based government agencies. He's a recognized leader in intellectual property, advising on IP policy, operations, and strategy for startups, scale-ups, technology transfer offices, accelerators, and incubators, venture capital groups, and governments, provincial, federal, and international. Prior to joining Innovate BC, Peter was startup interim CEO of Intellectual Property Ontario. He's also the founder of Northworks IP and co-founder and past board member of the Innovative Asset Collective, Canada's first patent collective. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much, Sydney. I appreciate it. And this, I like to think that it's Friday afternoon, but we are saving the best for last. It's been a great 3 days of events. And my thanks to SIP and the team for putting on this great conference. Doing the right thing for the planet is essential to our future, but it's not always easy. And I think our panel of experts today will start to talk through some of the challenges they have. We're going to talk through about the struggles of pushing against the status quo, lessons learned, working with emerging ideas that can gain ground and start to change our climate and improve our environment and where we live. Our panel today is really entitled Lessons from Climate Leaders, a David and Goliath panel. What I'd like to talk about today is about how some of the panel here today has taken their tenaciousness and being able to have some victories. And we're also going to talk about where some of those challenges have been and lessons learned for some of our audience to walk away with. What I'd like to do is actually introduce our panel members first and then kind of dive into some questions. But before we get going, before we go into the questions, let me introduce Ray first. So Ray, I'm wondering if you can give a bit of a background on yourself and where you're coming from today.
Awesome. So I'm Ray Brougham, the founder and CEO of Rainhouse Manufacturing Canada. We established in 2001, and we do a variety of things as a manufacturing company. We have a CNC machining division. We have circuit board assembly. We do contract manufacturing, and so a whole suite of things that has given us the confidence to do something a little bit different. We started this year a new company called Rainhouse Energy. So Rainhouse Energy is taking on the challenge of dealing with electric vehicle batteries. So we saw that there's a need and a growing sort of supply. It's a bit early, but it's a good time to get into it, of electric vehicle batteries that are no longer suitable for the car, but they probably have another 5 to 10 years useful life. And I'll talk about it later, but there's a lot of challenges with that. And I'll pass it back to Peter.
Thank you very much, Ray. And Callum, I wonder if you can introduce yourself as well and a bit of background on where you're coming at today's discussion.
Sure, yeah, thanks. My name is Callum Campbell. I'm the founder and CEO of Greenline Marine. So I'm a naval architect by profession. So I spent half of my career designing and building essentially car ferries for clients on the west coast of North America. And then for 9 years, I was the director for the province of BC of the inland ferries, so the inland fleet of highway ferries, where we replaced about 5 of those ferries while I was there. I left that job about 18 months ago to start Greenline Marine. We're looking to introduce all-electric passenger-only ferries into BC, starting with runs between Bowen Island in downtown Vancouver and Gibson's in downtown Vancouver for 2026. It's a fairly ambitious initiative, and I'd be happy to talk about it a little bit later as well.
Thank you very much. I look forward to this discussion today. Dominique, wonder if you could introduce yourself and again, where you're coming at.
Sure. Good afternoon. So my name is Dominique Spragg. I'm an aerospace engineer by training. I've been in the industry for about 35 years. Held roles with Pratt & Whitney Canada in the jet engine space and Avcorp Industries in Vancouver at one point, and then subsequently Viking Air and de Havilland, where I was in charge of bringing the Twin Otter back to life, so to speak, and ran that operation for a number of years. Through the 20-teens, I got involved in sustainable aviation progressively on projects with exploring hybrid aircraft and also Canadair water bombers, which is maybe a reaction to climate change as opposed to an adaptation technology as opposed to a prevention technology. That led to ultimately in 2020 joining a group out of Singapore that was running 2 companies in Seattle. One was called Eviation, which was developing an electric airplane, and the other one called MagniX, which was developing electric motors. And I subsequently became the CEO and chairman of those companies over the course of 2 or 3 years. We eventually flew the electric airplane, and it's in current development. Currently, I'm basically consulting in sustainable aviation and advanced air mobility, as well as working on a generative AI startup for the aerospace industry. One of the other ancillary roles I have is actually chairing the selection committee of INSAT, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as one of the avenues for government funding targeted towards sustainable aviation.
Great. Thank you very much. And Amber, I wonder if you could spend a minute with your background as well.
Sure. My name's Amber Simpson. I'm the CEO of Alexzi Building Solutions. My background started as a counselor. I worked with high-risk families. That's really where I became aware of the need for affordable housing. And then I moved into real estate. I've been a realtor for years, selling homes on the island. Also got to experience the need for more sustainable building products, got into renovation and design, understood the need for waste solutions. And then about 5 years ago, had the opportunity to start building technology for realtors. And then that led me to partner with an exciting company called Nexi from Vancouver. And my company, Alexzi, had planned to open a manufacturing and building plant to manufacture Nexi's new building product. And it was during that process that I learned a lot about the challenges bringing a new product to market, but also just the real need we have for new innovations.
That's great. So we have electric vehicle batteries, car ferries, aircraft, and sustainable buildings. So I think we've got a great range of commentary here. So I'm looking forward to this. And I'll ask a question for the whole group. Maybe Amber, I'll ask you to start. And what I like to think about or talk about is, everyone's perspectives on how do you get that sustainable technology or product or service into the market in BC? Like, where is those opportunities and challenges? I know, Amber, you had a few comments you had early on in getting off the ground, so maybe I can let you start with this question.
Sure. Where to start is the question. I definitely think, the construction industry, it's been the same for hundreds of years. It needs innovation. Everyone is looking for new innovations. The challenge is what product can be used that can be scalable and that can also be sustainable and affordable and resilient. And just the list goes on and on and on. So as we looked at the product Nexi had, it did solve a lot of those needs that we have for new building product. But the challenge came from how to properly scale and manufacture it. And so that really led us into a process where we understood that instead of trying to bring a product to many different types of buildings, it might need to be that you find the right product that gives you those sustainable, resilient properties that can be rapidly assembled, but that you need to start with very simple designs and make it very repeatable so that you can approach it with scale and it can become profitable so you can make it affordable.
Okay. And Colin, you talked a bit about, you have ferries you're looking at putting into service or have done work on that. So you're maybe past that scalable stage, or are you still in that? Where's your comments on, the scalability challenges from your perspective?
Yeah, so to be clear, we're looking at passenger-only ferries, and we're essentially looking to deploy technology that already exists. So this isn't an R&D project, right? There's all kinds of great innovation going on in around BC right now, but we're actually looking to piggyback off the good work that others have done to deploy this technology to BC. So you asked, the question is, where do we start? Well, we start with the customer, right? Where are the customer needs? Where are people ready to embrace this type of service? And for us, the two runs we've selected, Bowen Island to downtown Vancouver and Gibson downtown Vancouver, two reasons. One is because there's a big, strong commuting base right there. Those people typically travel from the center of their community, and many of them are simply going to downtown Vancouver. So a passenger-only ferry to downtown Vancouver makes good sense for them. We've done a ton of customer discovery surveys, open houses with those folks. They're ready to go. And I suppose the other is just a very practical logistical constraint, the limitations of the batteries. How far can the vessels travel? And so these two runs are within the current limitations of existing technology.
Okay. And so what's your thoughts on, your effort once you get that running, how to scale that to the next level? I think one of the challenges we have just as a country as a whole is we have great innovations and products and services, but how do we grow that? So how do you, if you're deploying on the work that's already done, where are your challenges going to be on taking that path past your, your current plans?
Yeah, and I think we're in that right now. So one of the things is about, with an electric ferry, you need shore charging. So how do you bring in shore charging efficiently, right? We do this on the land side. How do we do this on the marine side? So we're looking at the charge barge, for example, a scalable, repeatable piece of equipment, a dock structure, essentially, you can build in a standalone shipyard in a controlled facility and then bring it on site. And it contains, containerized batteries in the charging system. And as much as you can pack onto that in a modular way, you bring that to the site. And so, this is a building block. So we're not just looking at two vessels. We're looking at two vessels and three charging barges. And then those are the building blocks by which we can scale, right? As the battery technology improves and the endurance of those runs, and we can look at longer runs, we have some of those building blocks already in place.
That's great. Dominique, any thoughts from your side as we transition from passenger ferries to the aircraft side, and appreciating that aircraft probably comes with a lot of extra checks and balances when it comes to things like making sure the aircraft stays in the air. I would like maybe not this question, maybe another question, but something really interesting in our prep session where you talked about energy density versus the realities of physics and aircraft. So I don't know if you want to weave it in now or talk about it later, but
we'll come to that one maybe a little later. But I thought I'd start my comments on the whole landscape situation. I see advising different companies that are working on everything from aviation fuel, what's termed e-fuel, all the way through to actual flying aircraft. There are many different ways of having an impact or making an impact on environmental improvements within aviation, but it's also true within almost every walk of life that we have. And I think what we're seeing is that we're in a phase now of maturation where ideas that were kicked around over the last 5 years as whiz-bang thoughts, if you will, that we're going to save the world, a number of them are proving to be very challenging, maybe too challenging for today, and others are ripe for commercialization and growth. And I think that's my core message from my perspective, is that the time is to start doing things that help, not trying to do things that are perfect, and find ways of moving the needle that actually starts to cultivate a culture of change, not just about arguing about it. And I think that's the other sad part maybe of our society today is our political landscape is one of blacks and whites and rights and wrongs. And we need to move into a world of, you know, how can we make things better, or which solution is better or worse, as opposed to trying to be absolute about it. And I think that leadership is really about embracing that change and finding a way of moving that needle by getting investment, finding skills and resources, and pulling it together.
Just
Sorry.
maybe a follow-up question on that. It might go back as well to some of the other panel members. You know, you talked
Right.
about the leadership and the investment side. You know, where are we seeing successes in that, or where are you seeing that? I'm specifically interested in understanding what's working well that we need to recognize and continue to support.
Well, I think it comes down to coalitions of thought leadership. You know, you need to have a combination of capital. You have to have the right skill sets at the table. There are institutes within each of the universities. There are different types of associations and nonprofits that are trying to stimulate innovation. I think Callum said something very important. Innovation is sometimes about combining things that work. It's not about necessarily stacking 5 impossible, you know, they talk about the 5 miracle business plan. Well, if it's going to take 5 miracles to achieve a business plan, then it's probably not going to work. You have to get pragmatic about it and look at combining things that are well known and understood in innovative ways.
Okay, that's great. And Ray, any questions or any thoughts before I kind of move on to the next question?
No, just a little bit on, you know, a startup is something that we're doing. It's a little bit out of what we've been doing for the last 25 years. And some of the things that you run into, you know, we have a great idea, and distributed energy is the future. So we know that. But wow, there's a lot of interesting things that we have to do to get investors, right? So investors want innovation with a track record. Well, that's kind of hard to do. We've built an energy storage system, but our big challenge now is get certification. So it's so what are we doing is we're trying to have a really good plan so that we can attract investment into our company, and knowing that we're going to be looking for patient capital. Definitely, it's going to take a while to spool this up. We're up for the challenge, but there are many.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's your comment a good segue kind of into the second topic where we can get some of the group to weigh in on is, you know, I think with any clean tech space, early adoption is very challenging, especially when it comes with the incumbent coming in and saying we already have a solution, maybe for a lower cost. But when we have to think about the green space, we have to really think about what's going to be best long-term for the country and the environment. But I'm curious where your thoughts are, where the group's thoughts are on how do we crack that mindset and we start to think about regulatory hurdles for green solutions that the incumbents might not face because they already have a solution. It's not a green solution, but it works just as well. You know, there's a lot of financial realities and talent realities of trying to get over regulatory hurdles. And as a startup or as a potential scale up, how can we address that? And how do we do that either as a group, or how do we do that? Have you been successful individually in that? So I'm not sure who wants to take the question first, but it's really around that regulatory piece.
I'd love to answer that question. So I think, you know, as a small company, there's no way for this big regulation things that we have to do, there's no way we're going to do it by ourselves. So what we've done is we work with BCIT's microgrid facility to see if we can get faster testing happening, not just for us, but for anybody that's interested in this area of business. Certification is very hard to get because it's expensive and it's an evolving model. And so the way we are attacking it is we're working with NRC, BCIT, UVic. The BC Centre for Clean Innovation and Clean Energy is a funder, but they're also supporting us in a lot of ways to move the needle on just paving the way to improve our ability to spend our energy on innovation and not trying to jump through hoops or get through red tape.
It's a great point. Maybe I can pass it back to one of the three who wants to take it next on the regulatory side.
I'll maybe address that, since a little bit aerospace is a regulated industry like none other, I think. Maybe pharmaceutical wins out, but we have certainly an interesting situation where both the FAA and Transport Canada, as the two primary regulators as well, European regulators as well, but are leading a charge for change. And so I think they're government agencies. They've been mandated by the respective governments to adopt change and seek to understand opportunity. And I think that's a model of how the regulator needs to also come to the party and set up a specific initiative within themselves to adopt change. And certainly within aviation, the concept of equivalent level of safety has been adopted. And it's really about saying, well, we don't understand how electric motors can turn propellers, but what do we know about jet engines and piston engines that can be analogous? And often it's a hybrid of the two. Or in the advanced air mobility space, like the little the Beta eVTOL or the Joby eVTOL that you see. Again, there it's a hybrid of a number of different technologies. It's a fixed wing airplane, it's a rotary wing aircraft. And this idea of equivalent level of safety and a process for addressing what are called issue papers that are identified with the regulator is a systematic way to sort of stepwise through and maintain safety, but also allow innovation to take place.
So just a question on that. I think about smaller companies trying to break into an industry where there's lots of regulation run by the incumbents. What's your, or at least not run by the incumbents, heavily influenced by the incumbents, what's your thought on where smaller BC companies need to start working together to make sure they're preparing for that? I think, and that comes from the perspective, Ray had a really good comment. We want to spend money and energy on innovation, not regulatory work. So how does a new company coming in, thinking David and Goliath, start to crack that nut with the innovation they have early on?
I think it's important to find people who have a very fundamental or foundational understanding of what the expectations of the regulators are. That's paramount, and relationships matter as well. In fact, even when we brought the Twin Otter back at Viking, we did that with the help of a gentleman named Martin Swan, who had been a director of Transport Canada at one time in his career. So he knew the right people, he knew the right questions to ask and how to get the difficult challenges addressed properly and get on people's agenda. I think the reality is there are so many innovators out there right now trying to push different ideas that the regulators are they're choking on it. They're having a very difficult time maintaining a level of standard of service.
Okay. So. Amber or Colin would like to weigh in on either on that?
I think definitely a process that we would run into, being a new building product, by the time, it got to the municipality for the permits to be approved, there was a stall. It's a new building product, right? And so I think that all of the work needs to be happening right now, where we're already investing in these new technologies. Our universities, our high schools are testing them. We're using them in the market. So that when when we are developing them and bringing them to market, we're already familiar with them. It takes a long time to get the credibility of a passive house standard. So there's a lot of new innovations and technologies. We need to be testing and using them and having, I think at all levels right now, awareness of what they are. So by the time they're ready to go to market, we're ready to approve them.
Okay. Great. Any last comments on that? Might be a good segue to our third question, but I don't want to cut anybody off.
Go ahead. I'll echo Dominique's comments. Marine industry is also regulated and quite similar to aviation. So,
yeah. Amber, maybe I can actually start with you with my third question. I was going to get the panel's thoughts on if we want to grow and scale clean tech companies. It comes with a bunch of unique challenges, and how do we actually get companies out the door and scaling quickly? And you talked a little bit about, getting to the municipality and your product gets stuck, and your suggestion is we need to move earlier upstream to make sure we're having testing. But what are some other experiences you see or some commonalities you see in your building sector that we could be thinking about in the tech sector. And I think about things like affordable housing, big ticket items that other groups are talking about, like rapid buildings, very important topic, both out east as well as in our province. So maybe you have some comments on that.
Yeah, it considers a lot of deep thought, because we really need to first find the right product. We need a product that, number one, is going to be resilient to fire and water. It's a reality. And if we're going to be building safe homes, we need to have a product that's going to be more resilient, and definitely addresses more sustainability as well. But it comes into so many different places that once you do find that product, how are you manufacturing it, and how are you doing it at scale so you can make it affordable? I think a lot of challenges that we became aware of that I was not previously aware of is that, you can have a product and then you can get a lot of sales, but shipping the product can also make it not then a sustainable product. So the ability to manufacture off-site definitely speeds things up, but also the cost of opening a manufacturing plant, staffing a manufacturing plant, the cost of land, and then you need to have just rapid sales to keep it operational. It's very challenging. And so when you look at all of the challenges ahead of any company wanting to bring a new building product to market, I think we need a lot more support from the government. In BC, over the last 10 years, our population is growing from 4 million to 5 million, like over 700,000 people. I mean, this is a reality. And, right now, I feel like we're maybe a bit too proactive. We're not being proactive enough. I mean, we're being very reactive to the situation. But looking 10 years ahead, we have incredible technologies that, partnered with the human skill set, I think that we can really make a big advancement on rapid affordable housing. We just need to start creating some of those solutions now.
Thank you very much. The other panel members, or maybe pass the question back to you around what we need to be doing to get the scalability started.
Well, maybe I'll offer a thought. Certainly, maybe paradoxically, we have to think about these ideas as not just clean tech, but viable businesses, and pitch them as such. Yes, there's a cohort of investors who are particularly interested in clean tech, but ultimately all investors are interested in return on capital. And ultimately that is our capitalistic system by and large. And it's how you marry that reality and solve for that in combination with the government support. There is an innovation desert you have to cross often between a great idea and actually making money at it, and returning some of that capital. And that's where I think the government has a number of programs, and sometimes finding out about those programs is difficult, and equally time-consuming and expensive to apply to them. And this is certainly something which was recognized. If I can talk to the Strategic Innovation Fund of Canada, the SIF monies that were allocated out of Ottawa, unless you were applying for $100 million, you weren't going to want to invest the time to do it because it was such a burdensome process. And I think that the government is starting to find opportunity by setting up nonprofits like CICE in BC, like INSAT, that's about aviation. There are a number of others in other domains where they're almost delegating the allocation of those funds to smaller projects managed by expertise in the industry. And I think as a government trying to set that up, and BC's government making it available to have different pools of capital that can be stacked against these other pools of capital that exist or other programs is important as well. So for instance, in Ontario and Quebec, the provincial government will put matching funds up for people who are applying for federal programs. It's not been something that's been current in BC at the moment, and that's something we could lobby.
I will pause and give a plug for Innovate BC. Actually, one of the programs we have is called the Integrated Marketplace Program, where we have money allocated for test beds. Vancouver Airport is one of them. There is Port of Prince Rupert. And what Innovate BC does is we work to find organizations that can solve a real world problem those test beds have and make sure there's funding available. There is funding, actually, a portion of that comes from the feds. So we have created a bit of a stacking mechanism in place. So we do need to do more of that. But as I'm starting in this role, I'm finding there's a lot of groups that want to work together, and hopefully Innovate BC can start to bring some of the funding discussion together to companies to be able to make it a little bit easier to navigate where our funding programs are at. I'll segue off from my Innovate BC plug if I can. I'll maybe pass over to other panel members for their comments on the scalability in the challenging environment we all have today.
Yeah, I can say something. So one of the things that we were successful with doing that I think is going to really help is we're going to have a demonstration site. And so we got a grant through the BC Indigenous Clean Energy Fund. I forget the rest of the acronym. I think there's a little bit more to it. But what that will do is it puts us in a position with the right group. So we're working with South Nation. They're interested in having an emergency preparedness center. We're going to work with them. So we're the technology partner. They're going to be the promoters and disseminators of this to, diesel-fired communities and Coast Guard, interesting things like that will make people understand the value of what we're doing beyond what it costs, right? Because we're keeping electric vehicle batteries out of the recycle chain for 5 to 10 years. So there's a number you could put on that, but it's not tangible. So I think we could raise awareness about that. And but having that demonstration is going to make it so we can be viable to go forward as a company.
Okay, thank you.
I can maybe add, while we're talking about test beds and demonstration projects, I'll give a plug for digital twins. I think digital twins are essential for the type of thing that we're trying to do. Both it's an important story to tell. People understand a digital twin, they can see it, and it contains, and it allows you to sort of pack it full of information, right? As you reveal, what would this service do, right? It would take these people off the road. It would save these emissions, right? And here's the benefits, right? Here's the revenues as a result. So I think, I think all of these things, providing proof of what and validation. I think digital twins are just another important tool.
Yeah, I agree.
I think Callum's comments made me think of something else with respect to the need for us to think in systems. Very often we create one piece of technology and imagine the rest of the problem being solved by others. And as Callum talked about having to set up the charge barge, this was also a common problem with the aircraft that we were dealing with, is how do you deploy sufficient charging capacity to the right airports? Who do you partner with to do that? Do you find yourself doing it yourself? People in Beta who have sold to Helijet, they're doing it themselves. But there are a number of different problems associated with every great idea to ultimately make that system successful within the marketplace. And I think at some point, there's one of the biggest challenges is knowing who's who in the ecosystem. And I don't know whether Innovate BC or other initiatives like SIP could participate in creating more of an opportunity to share a marketplace for ideas, but a marketplace for challenges, and then see who's maybe already working on those solutions, bring the partnership together so that weakest link in your business plan can actually be solved, maybe by someone else who's already doing it.
No, I love that. I love that comment. I was at a health tech roundtable a few weeks ago, and one of the CEOs of the roundtable talked about, I have startups coming to me, and if I just had someone to send them to, it will send them on their way, because I know they need to work with somebody. And if they spend an hour or two with a company, they'll understand where they fit in a lot faster than them trying to grow and fail. So I think there's an opportunity there, not just for BC or for SIP, but for the bigger ecosystem to play. And I think there's some real world groups that we could, start moving forward with that on. Maybe I can jump forward a bit and talk about the bigger landscape of clean tech and sustainable products in BC, and your thoughts on community. I think your comment, Dominique, kind of gives me tease us up for that. Would like to understand, let's dive into that a bit more and understand how we can actually better collaborate and support this adoption. And maybe Callum, or I'll let you start. I know earlier on when we were talking about the program, you didn't have a great fanfare for the David versus Goliath topic. That was a title that was chosen, and you wanted to talk a bit more collaboration. So maybe I'll get you to start off as to where we need to be moving and why, and how do we do that?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I found the David versus Goliath framing to be challenging, certainly for what we're trying to do. You know, there shouldn't be winners and losers in what we're trying to do. We're trying to introduce options, right? Viable options that people can choose. You know, in the marine world, I think in particular, I think we need to learn about this, and especially what happens on the land side. In Vancouver in the past 20 years, I mean, we've got roadways for cars, we've got buses, we've got bike lanes, ride hail, car share, we've got everything. But on the waterways, we're still we haven't really seen that ecosystem grow, right? We need more options. And so once again, not winners and losers. I think, you know, I'd love to rewrite the end of the David Goliath story, to be honest, where, you know, David acknowledges Goliath's strength and stability, and Goliath acknowledges David's agility. And they're both important, and they both get on to provide the best ferry service that they can for coastal BC.
Like that. Perfect. Any thoughts from the rest of our group?
Well, I think just because it's International Women's Day, well, you rewrite the story, maybe David's a woman. And that was thanks to another founder that put that on her LinkedIn this morning. I thought that was good. So I think that the big thing here is also hope. I think, you know, a lot of us can talk of the challenges, which we're feeling and experiencing every day, but also of all of the advancement and hope that we see. And I definitely just feel so encouraged and excited about how technology and housing are coming together, and how we now you know, can look at a whole new future of smart houses that can function off grid, houses that don't rely so much on the size of the home or the, you know, features in the home, but instead the community that surrounds it. I think a lot of more community planning and large developments. We are very rich with land in BC, so a lot of population, but we have a lot of land. So a lot of future planning for large communities where we have quality, safe housing, but it doesn't need to be so much about the expense of housing as it's the community that surrounds it that makes it rich and enjoyable for people to live in. So yeah, just some very hopeful things I see coming forward in our future.
Just a reflection on your comment, I pair that with Dominique's comment about thinking in systems. It's not just the system of where your battery fits into the piece, but it's where that housing fits into the larger piece, I think is a great piece to reflect on. Thank you.
I think one of the things around the system is, and I had a background in manufacturing, and we adopted a lot of the Japanese methodologies, Kaizen, notably continuous improvement, and the pursuit of eradication of muda, which is waste in Japanese. And in many respects, when we look at our society and the things we do in our day-to-day lives, it's not just about carbon footprint, but it's about the waste and plastics and every other. Sustainability is, you know, with a capital S, has a lot more to do with waste in a sense. And if we can find ways to encourage continuous improvement, either through rules or through just motivation, we will reduce waste, reduce cost as a result. And, you know, it'll have a positive impact on inflation and all these other things that are major problems in our societies today. And we see that we've over-indexed, I think, my wife and I often talk about over-indexing on convenience and taking a piece out of the planet at the same time, you know, whether it's individually packaged tomatoes or things like, you know, there's ridiculous things that we see in our stores and marketplaces today that we didn't see 20 years ago. And you still don't see in markets in other parts of the world. So there's a certain mindset I think we've gotten used to, that there's a new normal we're accepting, which probably needs to be challenged with some fresh thinking.
Any comments, Ray, before I move to kind of there's one or two questions from the audience, so I'll move to that unless you have.
It just made me think of, I'll just say this quickly, is, you know, we look at how much we have to recycle, and my wife and I are always amazed at how much recycling we put out. And it's not something you can easily solve because that's the way it comes. So it's a mindset that has to change. But we generate crazy amount of recycled material, and it really isn't necessary. So how
But,
do you change that?
so your comment, so the question from the audience is, what is, quote, what is one thing we should not be fooled into doing because the truth has a little impact beyond making us feel better? And your recycling comment actually hits on that, but I don't know if any of the other panel members have a comment on that with respect to their industries as well.
I have a pet peeve, is everybody all in on hydrogen.
Oh,
I think this is a huge issue that it's one of those things that's politically very convenient. It's got all the right words around it: abundance, clean, you know, just water that comes out the other end, all these wonderful things. The practical realities of the physics of hydrogen make it very, very, very difficult, very, very costly to manage. Can it be innovated out? Maybe, but there are more challenges there than I think most people are prepared to acknowledge. There are other products out there. I'm working with one group that's doing e-methanol. There's more hydrogen in a liter of methanol than a liter of liquid hydrogen. 6%. It's a carrier. Carbon is a carrier of energy in that context. It's a very interesting type of solution. As long as you're prepared to reuse and recycle and use biogenic carbon technologies, there are various things that can be done. So carbon sometimes is vilified, but it's not necessarily the most, as a result, we're creating ideas in people's minds that are maybe not, you know, science doesn't support particularly well.
yeah, similarly with EV batteries, right? And they're very clean technology, but there's a lot of waste products to make them. And then what we're trying to do is just hold them back a little bit longer and squeeze out what we can from them before they end up in that eventual end state.
Thank you. Maybe with that, we have about 5 minutes left before we move to wrap up. Maybe I can ask the panel to spend the time with what do we do next? What is the call to action that, you know, we need to put on the table for, you know, whether it's for SIP to move discussion forward, for Innovate BC to think about, for a bigger ecosystem. When I look at the notes from the meeting, we've talked a lot about, you know, patient capital, regulatory help, spending energy on innovation compared to regulatory, thinking in systems, less David and Goliath and more collaboration and mindset change. But where do we actually start? Where's the first piece from each of your perspective?
I'll say, you know, you touched on all the points that I think need to be addressed. Collaboration is a big one. I was involved in a Ernst & Young study years ago, and it hasn't changed today. We still don't collaborate very well. We don't do as much R&D as we should, and we don't invest in ourselves. We don't take risk. You know, the Americans are way ahead of us in that way, and I think that has to change. It's a mindset, you know, take a chance on investing on something or collaborating with somebody that might, you know, take some of your business away. I don't know what the real problem is there. I think collaboration is everybody wins most of the time. And then R&D, you know, that's something that we definitely need to embrace and support.
I volunteer one thing. I mean, there's many places to go with this question, of course. The patient capital aspect we haven't talked a lot about, and you know, on one sense, the most expensive capital out there is venture capital because it's looking for highest returns. What I've seen in the US, having worked a fair bit down there in the last few years, they have programs with the Department of Finance, Department of Energy, the Department of Transportation, which provide for, we'll say, loan guarantees. There's a program particularly called the Title 17 Loans Program, and it's big loans, 100 million, 500 million, $1 billion. And it provides for guaranteeing a backstop so that people can actually get the loans necessary over long periods of time to commercialize something big. Right? Granted, Elon Musk took advantage of it, but others do as well. The people at Universal Hydrogen are doing it. There's a number of different groups that I've been involved with who have applied for these things, and they're very, very impactful because they build the bridge that then the investors can come along and say, okay, well, I'll match that, or I'll work with that. And it really starts to create a catalyst effect. And I'm not sure that we've got equivalent systems in Canada to adopt that sort of thing. At that scale. Yeah.
I'd love to see, you know, our government invest in, 10 new building products right now that, we've got our high school students working on, our colleges, our universities, knowing that in the future we will have a solution. We're investing in it now. We're taking it to market. We're testing it out. We're building with it. And we're going to find something that is resilient, sustainable, that we can manufacture affordably so that we can build rapidly, and we can create a lot more housing and create really vibrant communities. We kind of need the Tesla of the new building product, and we can sit back and wait for other companies to build it. And a lot of them are trying really, really hard, and they're failing because it costs so much to bring any new product to the market. So they need the support, and I think we need to make this a big initiative. And I would love to see us invest more in manufacturing. So, thank you.
And final thoughts, Colin?
Yeah, I think we put a lot of time and energy into fuel swaps. So this is where you kind of take existing infrastructure when we have it and try and find a clean way of doing that same thing in a way that it doesn't necessarily impact anybody. It doesn't change any behaviors. And I think that's possible, but it's just very expensive often to do. And I think we don't spend enough time about service design and really looking at new ways of doing things. The technology should be in service of the environment, in service of people, in service of communities. And so I think, yeah, so for me, it's the service that's equally as important to the technology. I'm not quite sure we put enough attention to that.
That's great. So we're right on schedule, and I'm going to be passing it back to SIP in a minute. They might have some thoughts on where we went today, and some of the key takeaways. I know from my perspective, there was a good discussion on, again, I go back to your comment, Ray, on we need to spend time on and energy on innovation, not necessarily regulatory work. Usually for companies to scale up, they need at least three things. They need access to capital, non-dilutive capital, they need the talent, and they need regulatory help globally. So I think that's a really great point. The thinking in systems, I think, applies equally as much as it does to a technology. For example, the electric barge versus looking at the housing system as a whole. And then the last piece I'll maybe leave as for thought before I pass back to SIP is perhaps it's less David and Goliath and more the collaboration piece that will be where successful we've had. So I'll pass it back to SIP, and thank you very much for everyone's discussion today. Incredibly enriching for myself.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Peter, and thank you, Capital Daily, for sponsoring this important conversation. Thank you for our presenting sponsor, RBC, and our Catalyst sponsor, Vancity, for supporting Rising Economy 2024 in partnership with Pacificam. Thank you to all of today's speakers, especially in this afternoon's panel. We encourage you to head back to the Hoover platform to continue the conversation. Up next, with a doozy for a closing of a Friday, is Innovating the Future of Housing. Thank you all for joining, and have a great rest of your day.